Hello children, welcome back to the part 2 video of nationalism in India. In my previous video, I had discussed about all those events that took place from 1915 to 1920. In this video, we are going to look all those events which took place after 1920. In the previous video, we had discussed about a non-cooperation movement, how it spread to towns, the countryside and the plantation, and reason why it was a failure. But in the year February 1922, Gandhiji decided to call off the non-cooperation movement, or let's say finally put an end to this non-cooperation movement. What was the reason behind this, children? There were three reasons. One, Gandhiji felt that this movement was becoming violent. Number two, some leaders wanted to participate in the elections to the Provisional Council. Number three, burning down of a police station in Chauri Chausa in Uttar Pradesh. What was that incident, children? Some angry mob decided to burn a police station in Chauri Chausa in Uttar Pradesh. This police station was, or let's say, consisted of only British officers. So when Gandhiji came to hear about this, he decided to call off the non-cooperation movement because he was very unhappy with it. Now let's look to the next concept, towards civil disobedience. What were the three things that led to this civil disobedience movement? First thing we should understand is that in the late 1920s, there was an aggressive change in the Indian politics. What was the reason that brought about a change, or that shaped the Indian politics? Two reasons. One, worldwide economic depression. Second thing, falling of agricultural prices. The next thing was Simon Commission. What is the Simon Commission? Because of all the political events that was happening in India, the British government decided to bring about some constitutional reforms and suggest some changes. For this, a statutory commission was set up to look into the functions of the constitutional system in India and suggest changes. So, in the year 1928, Simon Commission arrived in India and it was greeted by a slogan, "Go back, Simon." Why did the people greet them with this slogan, children? Because in that commission, there was no Indian members. It was a 9-member commission and all of them were Britishers, and the Indian Congress people was not in favor of this. So they greeted them with a flag, "Go back, Simon." Next thing was the Purna Swaraj. In December 1929, under the presidency of Jawaharlal Nehru, the Lahore Commission or the Lahore Congress formalized the demand of Purna Swaraj, or full independence for India. It was declared that 26 January 1930 would be celebrated as Independence Day. The beginning of the civil disobedience movement, or let's say the famous Dandi March or the Salt March. Mahatma Gandhi believed that salt could be powerful symbol to unite the whole nation because salt was considered both by the rich and the poor. So, on 31st January 1930, Mahatma Gandhi wrote a letter to Viceroy Ivan stating 11 demands. Among the demands, the most striking of all was a demand to abolish salt tax. The demand needed to be fulfilled by 11th of March, or else the Congress would start the civil disobedience campaign. Lord Viceroy Ivan did not reply to the letter, nor did he fulfill the demand. So Gandhiji, on 12th March 1930, along with his 78 volunteers, started the famous Dandi March or the Salt March. They walked for 24 days, from Sabarmati to Dundee. Many of them joined them on the way. On 6th April 1930, Gandhiji violated the law by boiling salt seawater and making salt. The Salt March marked the beginning of the civil disobedience movement. Thousands of people broke the salt laws in different parts of the country. People demonstrated in front of the government factories. Foreign clothes was boycotted. Peasants refused to pay revenue. Tribals violated the forest law, etc. The colonial government, or let's say the British, began to arrest Congress leaders like Abdul Ghaffar Khan and Mahatma Gandhi. The government repressions were quite brutal. Even women and children were beaten up. About 1 lakh people were arrested. Seeing this horrified situation, Gandhiji decided to call off the movement and enter into a pact with Ivan on 5th March 1931, which is called the Gandhi-Ivan Pact. Gandhiji's concern to participate in a roundtable conference in England, but when the conference broke down, Gandhiji returned back to India and relaunched the civil disobedience movement. This continued almost for a year, and by 1934 it lost its momentum. Now let's look into the class of people who took part in the civil disobedience movement. They were the farmers' children, the women, and the industries. Now let's look at the farmers. The Patyadas of Gujarat and the Jats of Uttar Pradesh were very active in this movement. For them, the fight of Swaraj was a struggle against high revenue. But when the movement was called off in 1931, without the revenue rates being revised, they became very disappointed, and many of them did not join this movement when it was relaunched in 1932. The small tenants just wanted the unpaid rent to the landlords to be remitted. They also joined this movement, but the Congress did not want to alienate the rich landlords, and hence the relationship between the poor farmers and the Congress was very uncertain. Now let's have a look at the industrialists. The Indian merchants and the industrialists grew their business during the First World War. They were against those colonial policies which restricted their business activities. They wanted protection against import of foreign goods and also a rupee sterling foreign exchange ratio which would discourage imports. The Indian Industrial Commercial Congress was formed in 1920 and the Federation of Indian Chamber of Commerce and Industry was formed in 1927. This was a platform to bring all the business people together to achieve their objective. For businessmen, Swaraj meant end of oppression, colonial policy. Now let's see the women participations. Women also participated in the civil disobedience in large number. However, most of the women were from the high caste family in the urban area and from rich peasant household in the rural area. But for a long time, the Congress was reluctant to give any position of authority to women within the organization. The Congress was just keen on the symbolic presence of women. Now let's look into the limitations and the reason for Gandhiji to call out the civil disobedience movement. The Brahmins or the upper caste of the Indian National Congress did not give equal importance to the Dalits. Dalits, addressed as untouchables, were not moved by the concept of Swaraj. Mahatma Gandhi used to call them Harijans or children of God. He also organized satyagraha for untouchables. He knew very well without them Swaraj could not be achieved. But they were not keen on the satyagraha movement. They were only keen on a different political solution to solve the problem of their community. They demanded reserved seats in educational institutions and a separate electorates. Because of this reason, they did not actively participate in the civil disobedience movement. Now let's look at the Muslim League. After the decline of the non-cooperation Khilafat movement, Muslims felt alienated from the Congress, due to which the relationship between Hindus and the Muslims worsened. Muslims feared that they would be submerged under the domination of a Hindu majority in independent India. Because of all these reasons, they also did not participate in the civil disobedience movement. Now, what are the reasons for Gandhiji to call off this movement? One, the horrifying violence that took place between the British and the Indians. Second one, the arrest of many Congress leaders also was the another reason for him to call off this movement. Now the next concept is the Pune Pact and the two flags that was introduced during the Swadeshi movement. Now what is this Pune Pact? Children, in my last slide, I had told you that the Dalits did not participate in the civil disobedience movement. They began organizing themselves, demanding reserved seats in educational institutions and a separate electorate that would choose Dalit members for Legislative Council. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, who organized the Dalits into a depressed classes association in 1930, clashed with Mahatma Gandhi at the Second Roundtable Conference by demanding a separate electorate for the Dalits. The British favored Ambedkar and Gandhiji began to fast up to death. At last, Ambedkar had to surrender and ultimately accept Gandhiji's position, and the result was the Pune Pact of September 1932. It gave the depressed class, which is later or today known as the scheduled caste, reserved seat in the provisional and central legislative council, but they were to be voted in by the general electorates. Now let's look into the two flags that was introduced during the Swadeshi movement. During the Swadeshi movement in Bengal, a tricolor flag, that is red, green and yellow, was designed. It had 8 lotuses representing 8 provinces of British India and a crescent moon representing Hindus and Muslims. In 1921, Gandhiji designed a flag. It again had a tricolor, but it was red, green and white and had a spinning wheel in the center representing the Gandhian ideal or the Gandhian idea of self-help. Now we come to the last subtopic of this chapter, the sense of collective belongingness. In the 20th century, with the growth of nationalism, children, I hope you will be able to recall the meaning of nationalism. It was taught in the previous chapter, but still I'll tell you. Nationalism means a love that a person has for his country, that the identity of India came to be visually associated with the image of Bharat Mata. The image was created by Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay, the same person who wrote Vande Mataram. Later, it was Abhindranath Tagore who painted this famous picture. In his paintings, Bharat Mata was portrayed as an aesthetic figure. She is calm, composed, divine and spiritual, and this later became the allegory for India. In the late 19th century, the Indian nationalists began recording folk tales sung by bands, and they toured villages to carry folk tales and legends. In Bengal, Rabindranath Tagore himself began collecting ballads, nursery rhymes and led the movement for folk revival. In Madras, Natesha Shastri published a massive 4-volume collection of Tamil folk tale in his book The Folk Tales of South India. Like I've said in the previous slide, two new flags were introduced for the Swadeshi movement. One was the flag which was introduced in Bengal, and the second one was the flag which was introduced by Mahatma Gandhi in 1921. These all created a sense of feeling of nationalism or a feeling of pride in the minds of the Indian people. Another means of creating a feeling of nationalism was through interpreting history. The British saw Indians as backward and primitive, incapable of governing themselves. In response, Indians began looking into the past to discover the great Indian achievements. They wrote about the glorious developments in the ancient time when art and architecture, science and mathematics, religion and culture, trade and craft had flourished. These glorious times, in their view, was followed by a history of decline when British or when India was colonized. These nationalist historians urged the readers to take pride in Indians' great achievements in the past and struggle to change the miserable condition of life under British rule. Now we have completed all the important concepts related to this chapter. Now let's quickly look into all the important dates and events that took place from 1915 to 1932. 1915, the return of Mahatma Gandhi to India. From 1916 to 1918, the various Satyagraha movements which he had organized in Bihar, Kedar district of Gujarat and in Ahmedabad. In the year 1919, we saw three movements. One was the Rowlatt Act. The second one was the Jallianwala Bagh incident, which took place on 13th April 1919. Then came the Khilafat movement. Then in 1921, the non-cooperation movement was launched. In the year 1922, the Chauri Chaura incident took place and Gandhiji had to withdraw the non-cooperation movement. In 1928, we had greeted Simon with a slogan, Simon Go Back. In 1929, Jawaharlal Nehru, C.R. Das and many other Congress leaders decided to have an independent India or a Purna Swaraj. In 31st January 1930, Mahatma Gandhi wrote a letter to Viceroy Ivan stating the 11 demands. In the same year 1930, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar established the Depressed Class Association. In March 1930, Mahatma Gandhi began the civil disobedience movement and broke the Salt Law. In December 1931, the Round Table Conference was held. In 1932, civil disobedience movement was launched. Well, children, we have come to the end of this video. I hope both my videos were very informative and has helped you understand all the concepts related to this chapter. I will be back again with one other video. Till then, thank you for listening. Take care. Bye now.